Hello everyone, it is week 3 of the quarantine. I am still in my apartment and I hope you are staying safe and staying inside as well. I wanted to give you an update just to let you know how I was doing, and I'd love to hear from you as well if you want to comment and let me know what you've been doing and staying busy during this quarantine. Maybe you're playing Animal Crossing. Maybe you're binging shows on Netflix such as You or Sex Education or, I'm sorry, Tiger King. I'll go ahead and say that. I watched all of Tiger King last weekend. It was such a wild ride of, I was gonna say tigers, but not really, just craziness. If you have seen it, then you know. But if you haven't, it's about this guy who has a tiger farm, and he is just crazy, and he tries to. I don't know. I even saying it now, I'm not even doing it a justice. So just, I don't even have to pitch the show. It's everywhere. But Tiger King is a thing. All right, guys. So I've been feeling this week like I've gotten into a routine that's been really nice for me. I've started running every other day, about 3 miles. And I have been cooking a lot. I think my Instant Pot and my Crock Pot are both very happy to see me. If they could talk, right, they would be excited that I'm using them more. My wild little terrier Poppy is probably the happiest I've ever seen her. So it's really not all bad. There's a lot of good stuff. I've just been kind of staying put and staying healthy, I guess. I read on the news today that you're supposed to have, the CDC now is recommending masks for everyone. And the only thing, I went on Amazon to try to price masks, but everything was sold out. You might have experienced this as well. I do have a bandana, so I was just kind of like testing it out, like tying it, as one wears bandanas if they're, bank robbers in the Old West or something, what that would look like if this was just my look, if I, went grocery shopping. It's not that bad, is it? It's not that bad. Is it that bad? You tell me, right? I'm screaming at my iPhone. So, yeah, it's weird times, right? So I just wanted to check in, and I have my copy here of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I'd like to read chapter 2 to you. If you missed chapter 1, go back and watch chapter 1, and catch up to the introduction of oh my, do I even remember this now? Of the Bucket family, right? Charlie Bucket and the chocolate factory that we were introduced to. His family's poor. He doesn't really have a lot, but he loves chocolate. And we've heard about Wonka's factory and the smells that overtake the town. So join me, if you will, to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as we read chapter 2, Mr. Willy Wonka's Factory. I'm not going to do it in a British accent the whole time, so that's all you get for now. All right, chapter 2, Mr. Willy Wonka's Factory. In the evenings, after he had finished his supper of watery cabbage soup, Charlie always went into the room of his 4 grandparents to listen to their stories, and then afterwards to say goodnight. Every one of these old people was over 90. They were as shriveled as prunes and as bony as skeletons, and throughout the day, until Charlie made his appearance, they lay huddled in their one bed, 2 at either end, with nightcaps on to keep their heads warm, dozing the time away with nothing to do. But as soon as he heard the door opening and heard Charlie's voice saying, "Good evening, Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine and Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina," then all 4 of them would suddenly sit up, and their old wrinkled faces would light up with smiles of pleasure, and the talking would begin. For they loved this little boy. He was the only bright thing in their lives, and his evening visits were something that they looked forward to all day long. Often, Charlie's mother and father would come in as well, and stand by the door, listening to the stories that the old people told. And thus, for perhaps half an hour every night, this room would become a happy place, and the whole family would forget that it was hungry and poor. One evening, when Charlie went in to see his grandparents, he said to them, "Is it really true that Wonka's chocolate factory is the biggest in the world?" "True?" cried all four of them at once. "Of course it's true. Good heavens, didn't you know that? It's about 50 times as big as any other." "And is Mr. Willy Wonka really the cleverest chocolate maker in the world?" "My dear boy," said Grandpa Joe, raising himself a little higher on his pillow, "Mr. Willy Wonka is the most amazing, the most fantastic, the most extraordinary chocolate maker the world has ever seen. I thought everybody knew that." "I knew he was famous, Grandpa Joe, and I knew he was very clever." "Clever?" cried the old man. "He's more than that. He's a magician with chocolate. He can make anything he wants. Isn't that a fact, my dears?" The other three people nodded their heads slowly up and down and said, "Absolutely true. Just as true as it can be." And Grandpa Joe said, "You mean to say I've never told you about Mr. Willy Wonka and his factory?" "Never," answered little Charlie. "Good heavens above, I don't know what's the matter with me." "Will you tell me now, Grandpa Joe, please?" "I certainly will. Sit down beside me on the bed, my dear, and listen carefully." Grandpa Joe was the oldest of the four grandparents. He was 96 and a half, and that is just about as old as anybody can be. Like all extremely old people, he was delicate and weak, and throughout the day he spoke very little. But in the evenings, when Charlie, his beloved grandson, was in the room, he seemed in some marvelous way to grow quite young again. All his tiredness fell away from him, and he became as eager and excited as a young boy. "Oh, what a man he is, this Mr. Willy Wonka," cried Grandpa Joe. "Did you know, for example, that he has invented more than 200 new kinds of candy bars, each with a different center, each far sweeter and creamier and more delicious than anything the other chocolate factories can make?" "Perfectly true," cried Grandma Josephine, "and he sends them to all the four corners of the earth. Isn't that so, Grandpa Joe?" "It is, my dear, it is. And to all the kings and presidents of the world as well. But it isn't only candy bars that he makes. Oh dear me, no. He has some really fantastic inventions up his sleeve, Mr. Wonka has. Did you know that he's invented a way of making chocolate ice cream so that it stays cold for hours and hours without being in the icebox? You can even leave it lying in the sun all morning on a hot day and it won't go runny." "No, but that's impossible," said little Charlie, staring at his grandfather. "Of course it's impossible," cried Grandpa Joe. "It's completely absurd, but Mr. Willy Wonka has done it." "Quite right," the others agreed, nodding their heads. "Mr. Wonka has done it." And then again, Grandpa Joe went on, speaking very slowly now so that Charlie wouldn't miss a word. "Mr. Willy Wonka can make marshmallows that taste of violets, and rich caramels that change color every 10 seconds as you suck them, and little feathery sweets that melt away deliciously the moment you put them between your lips. He can make chewing gum that never loses its taste, and candy balloons that you can blow up to enormous sizes before you pop them with a pin and gobble them up. And by a most secret method, he can make lovely blue birds' eggs with black spots on them, and when you put one of these in your mouth, it gradually gets smaller and smaller until suddenly there is nothing left except a tiny little pink sugary baby bird sitting on the tip of your tongue." Grandpa Joe paused and ran the point of his tongue slowly over his lips. "It makes my mouth water just thinking about it," he said. "Mine too," said little Charlie. "But please, go on." While they were talking, Mr. and Mrs. Bucket, Charlie's mother and father, had come quietly into the room, and now both were standing just inside the door listening. "Tell Charlie about that crazy Indian prince," said Grandma Josephine. "He'd like to hear that." "Oh, you mean Prince Pondicherry?" said Grandpa Joe, and he he began chuckling with laughter. "Completely dotty," said Grandpa George. "But very rich," said Grandma Georgina. "What did he do?" asked Charlie eagerly. "Listen," said Grandpa Joe, "and I'll tell you." And that is the end of Chapter 2. We'll begin Chapter 3 next week, hearing more about the Indian Prince. But, it's going to be okay for Charlie, right? I gotta, especially that line about them being hungry and poor kind of got me. Just because, we're all inside. My bed's right there, and, there's a whole world out there. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed that. And I'd love to hear from you, what you guys are up to, maybe what you're reading as well. And if you don't know what's going to happen to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, you can give me your predictions as well. That's it, guys. Hopefully you're having a great week. I hope that a chapter of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was a little bit of candy or sweetness to the week. And I look forward to seeing you next time, where we'll read Chapter 3, and you'll hear more about my life. All right. Have a good one, guys. Stay healthy, stay safe. I'll see you later. In the meantime, I will be quarantining. Goodbye. Goodbye.